Okay, 3 sketches down and only 8 more profile sketches to go. You can do it. We've got a couple of things we need to do from the last video. First of all, I named this f-stop ring, and what I actually want it to be is f-stop ring profile. And this one down here, we want to call this our depth of field, DOF profile. And now we're ready to create our next sketch. So we're going to create the next sketch using a shortcut. Click in the viewport to make sure that nothing is selected, and then click the right plane in the design tree. Now, up until now, we've gone up to the sketch tools in the tool ribbon and selected the sketch button therein. But in reality, that's just an extra step. If we have a plane already selected, we can just skip the sketch button and move straight to selecting the rectangle tool. Notice that SOLIDWORKS has inferred that you want to create a new sketch on the right plane, and you're now editing something called Sketch 6. So let's go ahead and draw our next rectangle by clicking twice. Now I want to tilt the edge of this rectangle back. I'm going to hit the Escape key to drop the tool. And notice that when I drag the corners of the rectangle, the edges remain rigidly fixed as vertical or horizontal. Even though we can't see them at the moment, the rectangle tool has created some constraints all on its own. To see them, we can go up to the menu bar, to the View menu, and down to Sketch Relations. The green squares that appear at each edge of the box represent constraints that are forcing those edges to be horizontal or vertical. So if I delete the vertical constraint from the leftmost edge and drag one of the points, you'll see that now I'm able to drag the corners to create arbitrary angles. So now we can use constraints and smart dimensions to fully define this shape. So I'll click the top edge, control-click this other edge, and make those collinear. And why don't we make, let's see, I'll go to the Smart Dimension tool. I know that I want the total height of this to be 4.3 millimeters. I know that I want the distance from our back interface datum to this point to be 27.5 millimeters. And for the distance from this point to this point, vertically to be 1 millimeter. Now check this out. Because I'm putting a dimension on a non-vertical or non-horizontal line, I have the option of creating an angular dimension. But I don't want to do that. I actually want just the horizontal dimension. So to get that, I just mouse down until it gives me a horizontal dimension instead, and we'll set that to 1 millimeter. The last dimension we need is putting a 1/4 millimeter clearance. And we're all done with that next shape, almost. There are a couple more details we want to add to this shape. First, let's use the rectangle tool to draw a couple more rectangles at the top of what is going to become our focus ring. Something like that. Make sure that they overlap the existing shape slightly, and then delete the bottom edge of each of the rectangles. Also, go ahead and delete the vertical constraints that are holding each of the vertical lines in place. And to trim entities in the sketcher, you can use the menu bar, Tools, Sketch Tools, Trim. You can go up to the Tool ribbon in the Sketch tab and over to Trim Entities, or you can right-click in the viewport and go down to Trim Entities, which is what I usually do. In the Property Manager for the Trim tool, make sure that Trim to Closest is the active mode, and then click the parts of the intersecting lines that you want to trim off. Just like that. Hit the Escape key to drop the tool, and now you can drag the vertical edges of the rectangles so that they are angled out a little bit. And then we're going to use constraints and dimensions to fully define those in place. First of all, I know that I want for this edge to be parallel with that one. There's a parallel constraint right here, right next to collinear, or over here on the left in Add Relations I can say parallel. Now those two curves will always be parallel, but I can still move them side to side. Now I want for this edge to actually mirror this one, and there's a handy way we can do that. Let's go ahead and select the Line tool, and I'm going to mouse over the center of this horizontal line here, and you'll see that a little yellow box appears letting me snap to the midpoint of that curve. I'll then draw a perfectly vertical line from there, and then without hitting anything else, I'm just going to right-click in the viewport and then click on Construction Geometry. That's going to do two things for me. It's going to drop the line tool, and it's going to convert this line to something called Construction Geometry. That just means that we're using it to help define our model, but it's not going to actually affect the final revolved feature. So now, using that, I can click this edge, Control-click the new center line we've created, and Control-click the edge opposite. Then I can come up and add this newly available constraint called Make Symmetric. Now those two lines will be symmetric across that single center line. Now just to practice that, let's do it again right over here. So we'll drag a vertical line straight out, right-click in the viewport and say Construction Geometry, Control-click the three lines that we want to be symmetric, and click Make Symmetric. Now I'm going to select this front edge, make it also parallel with the front edge of our shape. Take the top edges, make those coincident to one another, or collinear. And I also want to add one other constraint to these two. I want them to always be the same length, and there's a nice constraint for that called equal. So if I add a relationship called equal, then no matter how we change one of these shapes, the other one will update to have the same width. Now we can add a couple of dimensions. I know that I want the total width of these things to be 6.5 millimeters. And if I drag this in a little bit, I know that I want a 0.5 millimeter gap between them. Add to that the fact that I know that the height of these is 3/4 millimeter, and we are getting dangerously close to a fully defined sketch. Now I'll be perfectly honest with you, I can't remember exactly what isn't defined here yet, so the way I'm going to find that out is I can see that these edges are blue, so I'm going to grab any one of these blue edges and just drag it and see what happens. And if you'll notice, I can actually drag this back and forth, meaning we haven't defined where this exists horizontally on our ring yet. There should be a 3.9 millimeter gap between this edge and this point. We'll call that 3.9, hit enter, and now our sketch is fully defined and fully black. Now, obviously, having all of these sketch relationships visible makes it a little bit difficult to see what's going on with the sketch. There are two ways we can deal with that. One of them is to just ignore it, and when we exit the sketch, they disappear anyway, so it's not a big deal. But if we're working in a sketch and we want to hide all those dimensions, we just go right back up to the View menu and hide Sketch Relations. Then we don't have to look at them. So go ahead and exit the sketch now, and we'll move on to the next one. Let's go ahead and rename that sketch to Focus Ring Profile. And select the right plane. Click the rectangle tool to create a new sketch. And go ahead and click to define the corners of the rectangle. Now all we have to do is define that in space using the Smart Dimension tool. I know that from this datum plane back here to the very front edge is going to be 31.5 millimeters. I know that I want for the distance from this edge to be a clearance of 0.25 millimeters. And I also know that I want the distance from this edge to be 0.25 millimeters, but I want it to go in the other direction. So watch this. I'm going to click this edge and click this one, set them to 0.25 millimeters, and this time, instead of hitting enter, I'm going to click this button right here for reverse the sense of the dimension. That will flip the dimension back and forth to show which direction the dimension goes. So that's really nice to know. Go ahead and click the green checkbox and I'll be done with that dimension. Lastly, we just need a thickness dimension, and this should be about 1.3. And that was easy. So now I can just hit escape to drop the tool and click to exit the sketch.